For years, the world watched Diddy build an empire, LeBron James build a legacy, and 50 Cent build a reputation for saying what others avoid. But now, an old culture of celebrity, power, and private parties is being pulled back into the spotlight. In this story, the biggest question is not just who was there, but who stayed silent when the cameras were gone. After one resurfaced quote, "Ain't no party like a Diddy party," the internet began connecting old moments, old friendships, and old headlines in a completely different way. 50 Cent's new documentary doesn't just revisit names like Diddy and LeBron James. It reopens a conversation about influence, image, and what can stay hidden in plain sight. Because when fame, power, and public silence collide, the truth people fear most isn't always what's said out loud. It's what everyone heard, saw, and chose to ignore. There was a time when moments like these looked harmless. A quote at a party, a laugh on camera, a famous face in the room, and then life moved on. Nobody stopped to ask what any of it meant because in that world, access was the currency and silence was part of the dress code. But now the culture has changed, and the same names that once represented success, influence, and untouchable status are being looked at through a completely different lens. Diddy is no longer just a music mogul in the public conversation. 50 Cent is no longer just throwing shots for entertainment. And LeBron James, a man whose image has always been built on discipline, control, and leadership, is suddenly being pulled into a conversation he probably never expected to become this loud. What changed was not only the headlines. What changed was the way people started connecting the dots. It started with a line that seemed casual at the time, the kind of celebrity quote nobody thought would ever come back with this kind of weight. "Ain't no party like a Diddy party." Back then it sounded like one more flashy comment from a world built on excess, celebrity energy, and private luxury. But when old clips come back in a new era, they don't come back alone. They bring context with them. They bring questions. They bring memory. And suddenly, what once sounded playful starts sounding loaded. That is the pressure point 50 Cent appears to understand better than almost anyone. He knows the internet does not need a final answer to become obsessed. It only needs a line, a face, a clip, and a reason to look again. And once that process starts, the story gets bigger than the people trying to control it. That is where the documentary angle becomes powerful. It is not built like a courtroom argument. It is built like a mirror being held up to fame, asking the audience to revisit what they once ignored. It doesn't need to say everything directly, because suggestion is often stronger than accusation in the media age. A resurfaced quote, a familiar friendship, a famous name in the orbit of another famous name. That alone is enough to start a national conversation. And when that conversation involves Diddy, 50 Cent, and LeBron James, three figures from completely different corners of power, music, business, sports, culture, the reaction was never going to stay small. Because America doesn't just watch celebrities anymore. America investigates them in real time. What makes LeBron's name so explosive in this kind of story is not just his fame. It is what he represents. LeBron has spent years building more than a basketball career. He built an image of intelligence, responsibility, family, long-term thinking, and intentional leadership. He is not viewed the same way as a reckless celebrity who was always expected to end up in chaos. He is viewed as someone above that, someone calculated, someone who understands consequences. That is why when people hear his name mentioned around controversy, they don't respond with ordinary gossip. They respond with shock, curiosity, and suspicion. Not always because they know anything for sure, but because reputation changes the stakes. The bigger the image, the bigger the reaction when a shadow falls across it. And that shadow gets darker when people begin revisiting the culture around Diddy itself. For years, Diddy's parties were described like a symbol of status. Few were there, it meant you belonged. Few were invited, it meant you had arrived. Those rooms were sold to the public as glamorous, elite, and powerful. But public memory is selective. What looked like access at one point can later be reinterpreted as proximity to something far more complicated. That does not automatically prove wrongdoing by everyone in the room, but it does force a question that hits much harder now than it did before. What exactly were people seeing, ignoring, normalizing, or laughing off because the environment rewarded silence? That is the tension running through this entire story. Not just what happened, but what became acceptable to never ask about. 50 Cent understands how to turn that tension into narrative. He has built part of his brand on saying the uncomfortable thing out loud, especially when others protect relationships, money, or image. Whether people love him or hate him, they know he knows how to keep pressure on a story. And in a case like this, pressure matters. Because in the public eye, silence creates a vacuum. And whenever there is a vacuum around powerful people, the internet fills it with theory, speculation, archived footage, and social media trials. That is exactly why every old photo, every old clip, and every old comment starts getting pulled back into circulation. People are no longer just consuming information. They are reconstructing a timeline, frame by frame, word by word, association by association. That is also why this story moves beyond celebrity drama and starts touching something deeper about American culture. We live in a time where the public no longer trusts polished images the way it used to. People assume there is always more behind the branding, more behind the statement, more behind the smile, more behind the carefully managed public identity. And when someone like LeBron enters the conversation, fairly or unfairly, that distrust intensifies. People start asking whether public discipline and private distance are always the same thing. They wonder whether greatness on the court can make people less willing to question what happens off the court. They begin to ask whether powerful networks protect themselves not through direct conspiracy, but through comfort, loyalty, and mutual benefit. That is a much bigger story than one person or one party. That is a story about how influence works when nobody wants to risk being the first to speak. The internet has its own way of turning that uncertainty into momentum. One person posts a clip. Another person adds a theory. Someone else brings up old headlines, social media breaks, public appearances, missing appearances, real estate moves, and old friendships. And suddenly the story begins to feel larger than the facts that can actually be confirmed. That is where things become dangerous, because not every connection means guilt, and not every resurfaced moment proves hidden truth. But in a climate like this, perception can move faster than evidence. Once the audience feels there is smoke, they stop waiting for permission to believe there might be fire. And when enough people believe that, the pressure changes everything. Changes how interviews sound. Changes how silence looks. Changes how old quotes land. It changes how every public move is interpreted. That is what gives 50 Cent's documentary concept its edge. It is not just revisiting Diddy. It is revisiting an entire ecosystem of fame, power, loyalty, and image management. It is asking why certain spaces were treated like untouchable zones for so long. It is asking why certain jokes aged so badly. It is asking why old clips suddenly feel heavier. And maybe most importantly, it is asking why the public is now so willing to believe that what stayed hidden for years was never truly hidden at all. Maybe it was visible the whole time, but visibility means nothing when influence controls how people interpret what they are seeing. And that brings the focus right back to LeBron James. Because when a figure that big gets pulled into a storm like this, the issue is no longer just whether a clip was harmless or whether a quote meant more than it sounded like at the time. The real issue becomes narrative control. Can a legacy built over decades withstand a new era where every old association is re-examined under a harsher light? Can a carefully protected image survive a moment when people are no longer separating fame from accountability? And can silence still protect anyone when the culture has become obsessed with what was left unsaid? In this story, that may be the biggest question of all. Because once the public starts looking back, it rarely looks back gently. When the center of a public scandal shifts, it's not just the headlines that change. People's perspective changes too. And once that perspective shifts, the same old footage, the same old comments, and the same old friendships begin to take on a new meaning. That's where this story becomes even more intense. Because now, it's no longer just about Diddy. It becomes about the environment in which power was a language, access was a reward, and silence was a survival strategy. And when 50 Cent begins looking at this environment through the lens of his documentary, he isn't simply showing a celebrity fallout. He's portraying a world where everything could be happening in plain sight, yet officially nothing was ever happening at all. Public trust in America isn't what it used to be. Today's audience doesn't simply believe whatever is written in a press release. People look for patterns. They compare clips. They build timelines. They connect one statement to another moment and construct an entire story around them. That's why when LeBron James's name enters the conversation, the reaction isn't ordinary. LeBron isn't an ordinary celebrity. He is almost an institution within sports. Discipline, consistency, leadership, family image, business intelligence, and social influence are all part of his identity. So naturally, when such a carefully built image appears anywhere near a messy public conversation, audience curiosity grows even stronger. The most important thing here is that the internet creates a mood before it creates proof. First comes the atmosphere, then the theory, and eventually the theory gets repeated so often that people begin treating it like fact. That's why old quotes can become so dangerous. At one point, a line may seem like nothing more than part of party culture. At another point, that same line can become a symbol. And when that symbol resurfaces during a scandal, its emotional impact can matter more than its literal meaning. 50 Cent understands that impact. He knows the public doesn't always need a direct accusation. Sometimes, all it takes is putting a question into people's minds and letting that question grow on its own. Then another layer of the story begins, and that is image versus proximity. Public figures can control their image, but they can't always control their past proximity. If you appear close to a system that later comes under scrutiny, people don't immediately ask what you were formerly involved in. Their first questions are, how much did you see? How much did you understand? And how long did you remain silent? Those questions become moral before they become legal. And moral questions are difficult to answer because perception can sometimes carry more weight than evidence. That's why this documentary-style narrative is so engaging to the public. It doesn't have the tone of a courtroom, feels more like a cultural investigation. It's as if someone is saying, we're not just looking at who did what, we're looking at what kind of culture allowed certain things to happen. What were the rooms where everybody laughed, everybody watched, and everybody moved on? What were the moments that seemed harmless at the time but feel uncomfortable today? And which names were so powerful that even asking questions around them could be interpreted as disrespect or jealousy? This is where the story begins transforming from a personal scandal into a systemic story. LeBron's name feels especially significant because his public brand has always been built around control, precision, and maturity. When the name of a naturally chaotic star appears in controversy, people aren't necessarily shocked. But when they hear the name of someone who has projected a highly disciplined persona for years, the reaction is different. They start thinking, either all of this is exaggerated, or there is some layer of the story that the public simply hasn't noticed yet. That tension is exactly what content creators exploit and amplify. Because doubt itself has become a currency. And when doubt is created around a globally recognized name, the clicks come naturally. This is where 50 Cent's role becomes interesting. He often positions himself as an outsider insider. In other words, he knows the system well enough to understand its language, while maintaining enough distance to comment on it publicly. That's why when he pushes the conversation around Diddy, audiences may not see it purely as entertainment. They start wondering whether there is more to it than an old rivalry. Maybe he's not simply trolling. Maybe he's framing a narrative. And framing matters. Because the way a story is framed determines how the public begins to see its characters. From here, another dangerous process begins. Giving extraordinary meaning to ordinary public events. If a celebrity takes a break from social media, there could be countless normal explanations. If an athlete misses several games, there could be multiple reasons. If someone makes a real estate transaction, it could simply be financial planning. But when the public mood becomes suspicious, every neutral move can be turned into a coded message. This is the point where the story moves away from facts and into the control of perception. People search for hidden meanings behind every move. They interpret every silence as pressure. They treat every old clip like a confession. They turn every connection into evidence of deeper access. That's where documentary narration becomes even more effective, because it doesn't necessarily place direct blame. It creates weight. It can suggest that there was a system of influence. It can suggest that elite rooms operated by different rules. It can suggest that silence itself became part of the narrative. And all of those ideas begin building a larger theory in the audience's mind. Whether every detail is proven or not, the emotional logic can start to feel convincing. That's why controlled wording can be explosive in today's media landscape. You don't even have to openly accuse someone. You can strategically raise enough questions that the audience reaches its own conclusion. And perhaps that is the most powerful and most uncomfortable part of this story. Is the public actually getting closer to the truth, or are they simply consuming speculation packaged in polished language? Is this a moment of accountability? Or are archived moments being rebranded through a new lens? Are we finally seeing what was previously ignored? Or are we overinterpreting old associations because of a new wave of panic? These questions aren't easy, but one thing is clear. When a culture is built around access, fame, loyalty, and image protection, every old memory that emerges from that culture may not be evidence of wrongdoing, but it can certainly become raw material for suspicion. And that's why LeBron James's name in this story becomes more than just a celebrity mention. It becomes a test case for image, a test case for silence, a test case for how close is too close when the public begins revisiting the rooms where power once looked glamorous. Because when history starts moving backward, people don't just look at who was at the center. They also look at who was standing on the side, who was smiling, who said nothing, and who was so powerful that it took years for people to feel comfortable asking questions about them. What makes a story like this so powerful is not just the names involved, it is the collision between image and memory. For years, people saw Diddy as the architect of a lifestyle that looked bigger than music itself. He was not just hosting events, building brands, or moving through celebrity circles. He was shaping an atmosphere where success looked glamorous, where access looked like status, and where being close to power could make almost anything feel normal. That is why the questions hitting the culture now feel so much heavier than they would have back then. Because once the spotlight changes direction, the same room can stop looking exclusive and start looking protected. The same people who once looked untouchable suddenly start looking exposed. And the same moments that once passed as entertainment begin to carry the weight of hindsight. That is exactly why 50 Cent's role in this conversation has become impossible to ignore. He understands timing, but more than that, he understands pressure. He knows that in a story like this, the public does not need every answer all at once. The public only needs enough to start looking back with fresh eyes. Once that happens, the pressure becomes self-sustaining. Every archived clip becomes evidence of tone, if not fact. Every resurfaced quote becomes a symbol. Every old association becomes part of a bigger puzzle the audience feels determined to solve. And that puzzle gets even more intense when a name like LeBron James enters the frame. Because LeBron is not just another celebrity in the orbit of controversy. He is one of the most protected, most disciplined, and most carefully managed public figures of his era. His image has never been built on chaos. It has been built on control. And that is what makes the contrast so striking. When a person known for control gets mentioned in a story built on secrecy, excess, and silence, people immediately start asking whether the distance between those two worlds was ever as wide as it seemed. Not because they suddenly know more than they did before, but because they trust appearances less than they used to. That is the real cultural shift underneath all of this. America is no longer satisfied with polished branding. People want to know what was happening behind the image, behind the access, behind the quote, behind the silence. And when they feel like those answers were delayed for too long, they do not stay patient. They start building their own conclusions. That is where stories like this become larger than facts alone. They move into the territory of symbolism. Diddy becomes more than one man. He becomes a symbol of a celebrity system that may have operated for years with its own rules, its own protections, and its own language of silence. LeBron becomes more than an athlete. He becomes a symbol of what happens when a legacy built on excellence gets pulled close to a narrative it never planned to answer. And 50 Cent becomes more than a rival voice. He becomes the figure willing to keep asking questions long after others would rather move on. Whether people see that as truth-telling or strategy, it keeps the conversation alive. And in a moment like this, staying alive is exactly what the story needs to keep growing. What the public senses in stories like this is not just scandal but imbalance. An imbalance between what ordinary people are allowed to know and what powerful people are able to keep hidden. That imbalance creates frustration. It creates suspicion. And once enough suspicion builds, silence itself begins to feel like a statement. That may be the most uncomfortable part of this entire situation. In the past, silence from major figures could be interpreted as professionalism. Today, many people interpret silence as calculation. They do not see restraint. They see damage control. They do not see dignity. They see distance. And once that interpretation takes hold, every public move starts getting measured against what was not said. That is why the story around LeBron James carries a different kind of tension. It is not simply about whether a quote resurfaced or whether public perception has changed. It is about whether a figure of that size can remain untouched when the culture has become determined to re-examine every old connection. In a previous era, a single line about a party might have stayed frozen in its original moment. In this era, it gets pulled apart, reposted, debated, and reframed until it becomes something else entirely. The internet does not preserve context. It amplifies mood. And the mood right now is suspicion. That means even harmless moments can begin to feel loaded once the public decides there must have been more behind them. But the deeper story here may not be about one quote or one celebrity at all. It may be about the kind of environment that fame creates when too many powerful people benefit from keeping things vague. In those spaces, loyalty can look noble on the surface while functioning like protection underneath. Familiarity can blur boundaries. Influence can soften scrutiny. And people who would normally ask hard questions may decide that being close to power is more rewarding than confronting it. That is how cultures of silence survive. Not always through direct threats or obvious conspiracies, but through comfort, access, shared advantage, and the quiet understanding that some doors stay open only if certain things remain unspoken. That is what gives this story its staying power. It is not only about what may have happened in private. It is about how public culture reacts when private worlds start leaking into public consciousness. It is about what happens when audiences stop accepting celebrity mythology at face value. It is about what happens when old footage becomes new material, when old jokes lose their innocence, and when old relationships suddenly demand new interpretation. In that kind of atmosphere, truth and speculation begin to move side by side. One feeds the other. One gives the story credibility, the other gives it momentum. And the audience, watching from the outside, keeps asking the same question in different forms. Who knew what, when did they know it, and why did no one say more sooner? That is the question hanging over Diddy. That is the question fueling 50 Cent. And that is the question casting such a long shadow over LeBron James. Because in the end, public memory is changing. The culture is changing. The audience is changing. People are less impressed by access than they used to be. Less willing to excuse silence. Less convinced that greatness in one area automatically means integrity in every other area. And when that change happens, the people who built their world on image alone are usually the first to feel the pressure. So this story is no longer just about parties, quotes, or old celebrity circles. It is about what happens when influence stops protecting the narrative and starts attracting scrutiny instead. It is about what happens when history does not disappear but waits. Waits for the right climate, the right outrage, the right voice, the right moment for the public to finally look back and see the same footage differently. And once that process begins, one thing becomes clear. The hardest thing for powerful people to control is not the headline. It is what the public starts to believe after years of silence, years of distance, and years of carefully managed appearances. Because once the audience feels like something stayed hidden in plain sight, they do not stop at what they were shown. They start searching for everything they were never meant to notice. If you've made it this far, then you already understand why this story is bigger than one celebrity, one party, or one resurfaced clip. It is about power, image, influence, and the way public perception can completely change when people start looking back at history through a different lens. But here's the question. Are we finally uncovering things that were ignored for years? Or are we allowing speculation to fill the gaps where evidence should be? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you think powerful celebrity networks deserve deeper scrutiny? Or should old associations remain separate from present-day allegations unless there is verified evidence? If you want more deep-dive stories examining the people, timelines, and moments behind the headlines, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Because this story may be far from over, and sometimes the biggest questions are not about what was said but about what was never said.